Charles, we are absolutely honored today to have with us a person who may be one of our most important guests ever. I'm talking about the former acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker. General Whitaker, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
Well, you've got a new book out, Above the Law, and we're here today to talk with you about what your experience was like as the acting Attorney General. And I think this book is coming out at a crucial moment in American, indeed possibly in world history. What brought you to write this book? When did you start on it? And what are the key takeaways from the book?
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to tell the story of my experience as the second being Chief of Staff to General Sessions and Acting Attorney General was my second tour at the Department of Justice. I'd been the United States Attorney in Des Moines, Iowa, which is my home, and so I wanted to tell the story and my experience at DOJ and the Trump administration, but I also wanted to have a historically accurate accounting of what happened during the first 2 years of the Trump administration, and I wanted to make sure that this never happens again.
That's so important. Neither Jason nor I are lawyers, but we started on this journey in June of 2017. We've done over 200 two-hour podcasts looking into corruption and to the failures to actually go after the real corruption when instead Donald Trump and others have been persecuted by people, it seems to us, inside the Justice Department, the FBI, and elsewhere. So this book comes at a wonderful time. When did you start as Chief of Staff for General Sessions?
Yeah, so I showed up in Washington, D.C. in October of 2017. As Chief of Staff, I was the second Chief of Staff for General Sessions, and ultimately, after doing that for 13 months, I became the Acting Attorney General in November of 2018.
Mm-hmm. And
boy, how the years fly by.
And so, what was your sense when you got there in the beginning of why General Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation?
Yeah, and this is something I talk about in my book, is how General Sessions' recusal ended up bifurcating the leadership at the top of the Department of Justice. And so, that created all sorts of leadership issues at DOJ that I had to deal with as Chief of Staff. And his recusal, ultimately, just like the analysis I did to determine I didn't need to recuse, it was personal, facts and circumstances based, and it was made in March of 2017, months before I ever arrived at DOJ. But it did create some challenges at the top of the Department of Justice, with the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein in charge of the Russia investigation, and General Sessions in charge of the rest of the Department of Justice.
Right. So Mueller reported to Rosenstein then, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
Rod was the Acting Attorney General for the purposes of the Russian collusion fable investigation.
And at the time that he was put in charge of that investigation, who would have decided whether he, in fact, had conflicts of interest?
Well, so there's sort of each lawyer at the Department of Justice has to do sort of their own conflicts analysis, and it's kind of ongoing. And at the same time, because he was the head of an executive department, he could have sought others to give him guidance. That's what I did. I had extensive conversations not only with my own staff, but also career ethics officials to understand the parameters of what I could and couldn't do, or should or shouldn't do. And ultimately, it was determined, and I was able to decide that I didn't have a conflict of interest. In fact, there was determined there was no conflict of interest, and that I could be fair and impartial in the administration of justice. And I think, that was the same analysis that I'm sure the Deputy Attorney General had to do. Obviously, I talk about the episode in my book, and you see Andy McCabe, the former deputy director, former acting director of the FBI, on the cover of my book. But Andy McCabe and Rod Rosenstein have a famous publicly reported disagreement. They both felt each other should have been conflicted out of and recuse from the Mueller investigation at one point in time.
Yeah. Was that over the issue of McCabe leaking to the Wall Street Journal allegedly leaking to the Wall Street Journal about the Clinton Foundation investigation status?
Well, in this case, in the Mueller investigation case, it was not. It was an overall animus towards the president that Andy McCabe, because of his wife's political campaign and Andy's involvement. In Rod's case, it was the fact that he was possibly a witness to the really the fundamental question of the Mueller probe, which the Mueller probe was not about, and I know you guys know this because you've studied it extensively, was not about Russian collusion or any relationship. There's ample publicly reported information that there was never any evidence of any relationship between the Russian government and the Trump campaign or anybody on it. It ended up being an obstruction of justice trap that was set, not only for the president, but for myself and others, if there was a chance that we, would interfere in the investigation. So it was a trying time at the Department of Justice while I was acting Attorney General, to be sure.
So a lot of times you'll hear folks on the other side of the political spectrum say that collusion is a crime, collusion is a serious matter. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't see that collusion is actually necessarily a criminal act, is it?
No, it really, that was a shorthand. Again, it was a one-word slur, if you will, to paint, a negative inference on members of the Trump campaign, including the now President of the United States. The crimes that ultimately would have been investigated and were investigation would be any conspiracy to violate campaign finance laws. So if, the Trump campaign had, received a benefit from the Russian government and solicited that benefit. And I could also imagine, things like, which are farcical to even say them, but things like Foreign Agent Registration Act, where, somebody is essentially an agent of Russia and on the payroll, and so that they would have had to file a FARA registration with DOJ. So, there are several crimes that could have been investigated, but it was very obvious to me that there was never any evidence of any crime that could be investigated. And we know that from Strzok and Page's text. We know that from the fact that the counterintelligence investigation was about to be closed. We know that from the Director Comey and testimony he's given. We know that especially from the intel community and the Intelligence Committee, and their closed door interviews with various members of the Obama administration. So there's a lot of evidence, and then ultimately we know it from the Mueller report.
Right. So what was interesting to me, just as an observer, is that in the case of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified information, that was allegedly directed at a senior level by Peter Strzok and others. And then the same Peter Strzok gets involved in the Crossfire Hurricane or Crossfire Razor investigations. How unusual is that?
Well, at his most senior level, he was essentially right below Bill Priestep, who was in charge of the counterintelligence and those types of investigations. So they were both at very high levels of the FBI, and so you would imagine that really that they could be involved. I think the most important thing is how that's Bill Priestep right there on the camera. So Bill was very high up at DOJ, and Peter Strzok reported to him. And ultimately, the most sensitive, these types of investigations would be handled by their division. And, so if Peter Strzok was believed to be the right person to run the Hillary Clinton email investigation, I can imagine that the leadership, for their own reasons, would put him in charge of the Crossfire Hurricane counterintelligence investigation. But that being said, there were so many poor decisions made in both those investigations that, it's hard not to imagine that in retrospect that it was the absolute wrong decision to put Peter Strzok in charge of those investigations.
Because one of the things we've been benefiting from is the FBI Vault, which is, as I'm sure you know, a public repository of information, often redacted information and not all the information relating to certain cases. And the one that we've looked at, spent a lot of time going over, is the one for the Hillary R. Clinton investigation, which is a 40-part dump. I don't know how much time you've spent looking at this, but it's really a massive amount of information. And we like to contrast treatment of Trump versus treatment of the Clinton people, or treatment of the Obama people. So in this Ukraine impeachment, the president got impeached over suspicions of colluding with who knows who in the Ukraine over precious little evidence. In contrast, this dump includes a 302 summary of a senior State Department person sending a letter to Comey in January of 2016 saying, I'm a senior level person, here's some of the evidence I have that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are mishandling classified information and breaking the law. Please tell me that you got this stuff, and I want to go into a skiff and explain it. This is in, I think, part 23 or 25 of this dump. Comey doesn't respond. So the person walks in the door, January 27th or thereabouts, 2016, says, hey, to the Washington field office, I really need to give this evidence. It's right here. And they wait to write a 302 until late in February of 2016. And the mainstream press doesn't, and no one seems to have any curiosity as to who this senior person was.
You're right, and this is again one of the chapters in my new book is called Double Standards, and it talks all about how these cases were not only handled differently, but there was a presumption that Hillary Clinton had done everything right, which, as you point out, there's ample evidence showing that she didn't. And at the same time, there was a presumption that the members of the Trump campaign, including the president, were agents of Russia. And I really, one of the things that has struck me as we've learned more, especially from the Susan Rice email that's been declassified, she wrote on really the waning moments of the Obama administration, is that it evidenced and documented a January 5th meeting. And that January 5th meeting included the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, Director of the FBI, the Acting Attorney General Sally Yates, and others. And it really it tells me what's at the heart of all this, because I always want to get to the why. Why did this happen? And I really think that the Obama administration believed that Russia was the biggest threat to our sovereignty and our national security. And because the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, whether that was President Trump, Michael Flynn, or others, believed that China was a bigger threat, that ultimately, we have learned that the Crossfire Razor, Crossfire Hurricane was based on really a national security and a foreign policy disagreement between the two administrations. And that led them to, down a path of believing that people like General Flynn, the President of the United States, and others were agents of Russia, which there was never any evidence to prove, and quite to the contrary. There was plenty of evidence to suggest that the president was right, that China was the bigger threat.
Well, I don't know how closely you've looked into this because it's a little bit of ancient history, but if we go back to after the election in 2008, when Barack Obama won, the original agreement regulating the incoming Obama administration and the Clinton Foundation was actually signed by Valerie Jarrett on November 16th, 2008. There are three versions of this supposed MOU. And on, I think it's December 2nd, 2008, Bill Clinton held a Clinton Global Initiative Summit in Hong Kong after Hillary had been selected to be Secretary of State. Can you imagine if Donald Trump had done that in 2016? Let's say have Jared Kushner do a summit, let's say with Russia. I mean, that actually did happen. And nobody seems to want to look into the way money was laundered through this Clinton Foundation.
Right. no, and I think it is. There continue to be a lot of open questions that may never be answered, and it's too bad. I mean, the Clinton Foundation was used clearly as a, I always believed it was a workaround to avoid the campaign finance laws, where you could, only raise $2,800 or whatever it is from an individual with no foreign money. The Clinton Foundation obviously could raise unlimited money and raise it from all over the world, and it was to me, it was a very obvious end run, to raise money, for their personal use and personal wealth. And there's, I think anybody that knows how they spent that money, it is clear that it was not, some of it went to Haiti relief and other places, but it was also used to subsidize their lifestyle.
And again, you raised a very important question of why. And so another FBI vault file is the FBI vault file on the original Clinton Foundation investigation, which took place from February 2001 till some undistinct time in 2005. There were 3 people involved in this Russian persecution of Trump who were centrally involved in that investigation. They are Rod Rosenstein, Robert Mueller, and James Comey. And they could not see, you look at the FBI vault file, they could not see the obvious fraud. There was no Clinton Foundation. It was never a legally organized or operated entity in any place. It never had authority to do anything outside of the United States, outside of Little Rock. And it never actually got, you're familiar with foundations, it never got an audit, a real audit of its work. And that was known 2001 to 2005. So I'm somebody who likes to read mystery novels and solve complex problems, but I don't believe in coincidences. I do not believe.
Yeah, but I guess, since I've served as a U.S. attorney and chief of staff and acting attorney general, I do know that while there are, coincidences, sort of you have to get to the bottom of why those things have a relationship. I mean, I would want obviously solid evidence and facts to, before I made an absolute conclusion. But, I don't disagree. I've always said, and I still believe, that there are a lot of questions surrounding the Clinton Foundation and how it operated. And, I think fundamentally it looked to me to operate like a slush fund for the Clinton family.
Right, and I agree with you on the evidence. That's the focus of these shows. Well, we've taken people through voluminous government filings that show that governments have claimed that they have given money to the Clinton Foundation, yet the Clinton Foundation forms for all years through 2007 show 0 government grants. And, we just know that is not the case.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to your book. Are you going out on a book tour and meeting with people? And
yeah, so I think, unfortunately, because of the state of the world currently, any book tour, physical book tour, is delayed. I've been able to find other ways to talk to people about the book. I did a virtual book signing last week that was hosted by Freedom Works. Okay. I know that I'm doing some calls with smaller groups that have bought the book, and going to talk to them about and answer some of their questions about the book. And so it's been well received. I've been very humbled by the number of people that I've talked to that have read it and enjoyed it and have complimented me for a well-written book, well researched and documented, footnoted. And so I'm very pleased not only with how it's been received, but at the same time I think it's going to stand the test of time and to be an important historical document, ultimately, as people look back on this chapter of American history.
Yeah, one of the people we've been honored to interview is Sidney Powell, and her book, License to Lie. I know you must have some views about the current state of play involving Michael Flynn's trial and the curious behavior of Judge Sullivan.
Yeah, well, I mean, Judge Sullivan appears to have created an extrajudicial process. The Department of Justice, it has the sole charging authority under our system. The Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, Rule 48, governs the dismissal of cases and gives Judge Sullivan no discretion to dismiss this case, certainly not to set up his own prosecutor or someone to stand in the shoes of the Department of Justice. And so I was very glad to see that Attorney Powell has filed for a writ of mandamus. It's a very straightforward writ that tells Judge Sullivan to do his job and to do it with swiftness and to resolve the case with prejudice, which means that General Flynn can't be prosecuted again. So I think that case should come to a conclusion very soon. I also, was very curious to me that the judge has hired his own lawyer to advocate his position with the Court of Appeals. I've never seen that except in a ethics complaint where a judge is represented by a counsel. And so this to me suggests that the judge knows he's out on a limb and does not want to make any of his own statements in the appeals court to risk, receiving even stronger punishment from the people that supervise him in the Supreme Court and in the Court of Appeals.
General Whitaker, this is Jason. In your book, you spend a fair amount of time talking about how you were a U.S. attorney and then you came back to D.C., but were somewhat of an outsider and kind of even fighting your own staff from within the DOJ. Can you share a little bit of insight for viewers who perhaps haven't yet had a chance to purchase Above the Law?
Yeah, well, first, they should for sure go out and get their own copy. But that being said, I did, I had not spent any time in Washington, D.C., any meaningful time at the, Department of Justice on 9th in Pennsylvania. And so it was an interesting experience to go in there on the first day and to really understand what the main justice, as we call it, was all about, and to also experience, kind of the coastal elitism is what I would describe it as, is where, those that, from elite institutions that grew up in coastal communities, especially in the Northeast, sort of looked down their nose on the folks like me that were from the provinces, while at the same time, my experience was as much or more than theirs, having been both a U.S. attorney and an attorney in private practice, having won trials and both as a defense lawyer and as a prosecutor. And so, I had no fear that I could match them on legal acumen, and I set about building relationships with people that probably were suspicious of me at the beginning, but demonstrating that I, was more than capable of accomplishing the role, both as Chief of Staff to the Attorney General, but ultimately as Acting Attorney General.
And with regard to the Hillary Clinton email investigation, a lot of people have heard that she's destroyed evidence. We've heard about BleachBit. We've heard about smashing devices. There are a lot of people have spoken about Hillary Clinton's use of BlackBerries, and she even purchased BlackBerry devices from eBay. She said because she didn't like the keyboard. I have been very interested in this bit of news released by the FBI, and this, I think, was during your tenure, wasn't it, that this Canadian company, Phantom Secure, was brought down? While I don't remember every single case that was in front of me, we did go very hard after, kind of companies that were using technology to hide illegal activities. We closed several dark net sites, and there's always a balance between privacy and an ability to protect personal data, and at the same time, not frustrate a legitimate government investigation. I know that this is one of the things that we were just reading about in some of these recent terrorist attacks, where, for example, the one in Florida, where the Saudi airmen had shot several soldiers and patriots. And what we learned is that Apple was unwilling to help, unlock the iPhone. And I know that those that believe in, sort of personal privacy and believe that is, kind of the ultimate goal, where at the same time, I was disappointed to see that Apple wouldn't help the Department of Justice execute a valid search warrant of that device. And so, that's something I think that ultimately Congress is going to have to weigh in on. The Department of Justice obviously can't get into every phone, and that getting into those phones, especially in clearly terrorist attacks, could lead to potential evidence. And so that's a balance. I'm usually on the side of personally
keeping information about yourself and your whereabouts and what you do private, because most people are law-abiding citizens. But I think in unique cases, especially foreign nationals committing terrorist acts on American soil, I think there should be an opportunity to work together with technology companies to get into those phones and to develop evidence to make sure there's no more follow-on attacks.
Well, it seems like this is going to become a really big topic now that all we're hearing about is contact tracing and even forced COVID-19 testing. I don't know if you heard the interview that I did with Alan Dershowitz last week, but he's now put it out publicly that the police powers of the states allow them to actually forcibly vaccinate people. Did you get a chance to hear those statements from Professor Dershowitz, and what are your feelings about that?
I didn't, and one of the biggest things I always remind myself is to not give out free legal advice on these types of interviews. But I think that there is some of this that obviously during these national emergencies and state emergencies, the executive branch has police powers that are broader, but they have to be limited in duration and they have to be equally applied. I would want to do my own legal research on his opinion as to whether we can forcibly be vaccinated. I think that would be quite a moment to have that happen. But he is obviously a well-respected lawyer that that is sometimes is willing to give his legal opinions on national shows.
Yeah.
So changing gears a little bit, on this operation, Jason's operation, Crowdsource the Truth, we get many kibitzers, both comments and Twitter following people, and there's two broad camps. There are people, I think, like me, and I suspect you, who believe that Donald Trump has a team and has the fortitude to actually drain the swamp, or at least to go very far down the road of draining the swamp, thanks to the work that you're doing in your book and the work that you've done, your colleagues. Then there are the other people who almost like pat us on the head and say, oh, little boy, don't you understand? Washington is hopeless. It's never going to be solved. Grow up. Nothing's ever going to come of this. Where on the spectrum do you fit?
Well, I believe that we need to have outsiders like Donald Trump lead. And, I think he has made great strides. I think when he gets reelected, we will have a real opportunity to secure these gains that he's achieved, but also to continue to make a big difference in especially the administrative state. I think so much, personnel is policy, and I really think that he's put some key people in places of authority. I was really excited. I think Rick Grinnell did a great job at D&I, for example, but John Ratcliffe is a tremendous pick to run the D&I, and I really am a big fan of him, and we were U.S. Attorney colleagues together, so I know him well, and I was very happy to see him finally get confirmed. And so I think that's an example of where the president is putting personnel. I think Mike Pompeo is equally doing a great job at the State Department, and so many others that are leaving their impression and their imprint, and so that again, that the president's agenda is not frustrated. I think, when people talk about the deep state or the permanent administrative state or whatever you want to call it, I think ultimately, people elect a president to implement the vision that they've run on. And I sometimes people are shocked that Donald Trump is actually trying to accomplish that agenda that he ran on, but he is. And I think it's refreshing to actually have a candidate run for president and then when they're elected, go do what they've set out to do. So I am, I do have faith that the president is going to be able to do as much as he can to accomplish draining the swamp. I think it's an evergreen project that's going to require, obviously, a lot of diligence and a lot of effort. But he is a tireless warrior. I talk about this in my book, that he just, eats attacks and stress like an energy bar, and really just continues to soldier on and address whatever problem, confronts him.
And we have two or three, I guess, other U.S. attorneys who have been brought into these various investigations. We have Huber and we're out in Utah, I think. We have the fellow in Missouri, and then we have Durham. Now, with Huber, he didn't seem to make much progress. Maybe that's because he's doing much more than we can possibly imagine, and he needs to take his time. The gentleman in Missouri made swift work, I think, and John Durham, of course, is soldiering away. What should the American public take away from about the abilities and resources of these three people? Are these forces to be reckoned with?
Yeah, so I think in each case, to some extent, their charge was different, and their results obviously are going to speak for themselves. I mean, John Huber was asked by General Sessions to lead a review into several things that Congress had asked for insight into, and that General Sessions determined was the appropriate, kind of use of that review power of the Attorney General. In some cases, it was to review closed prosecutions and to see if those were properly closed or if there was more to do. Ultimately, I think Jeff Jensen from St. Louis was a tremendous, not only is he a tremendous person and a great U.S. attorney, but he was the right person to look at General Flynn's case, to see the abuses that happened, and to recommend that the case be dismissed. Ultimately, it's the Attorney General's job to determine whether or not a case should or be dismissed or not. But I think, he did a tremendous job. And, I think in the case of John Durham, the U.S. Attorney from Connecticut, he's somebody that I worked with when I was Chief of Staff on another review of a classified leak, and he did a great job. And so I expect when he's done with his investigation into the origins of the Russia collusion fable, I think we will have a full accounting. I mean, I know that General Barr recently announced that Durham has targets of his investigation, that he has developed evidence that crimes may have been committed. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what he has to say, both from a charging decision standpoint, but also I think it's going to be very interesting to see what John Durham has to say about the origins of the investigation and his report, because I think that's going to be enlightening. We to some extent know why the FBI opened the counterintelligence investigation related to Russia, and that is because of Papadopoulos' conversation with an Australian diplomat. But we still don't understand how and when, if any, evidence was ever developed from that moment on to justify the continuing to keep that investigation open, ultimately leading to all of this, kind of destructive pain that was experienced over, between 2016 and 2019.
Well, so for people who are not lawyers, and myself included, perhaps you could explain to us what U.S. attorneys generally do in investigations. That my understanding is that U.S. attorneys are not in the business of writing reports. They're in the business of deciding, did crimes occur, and should we then try to charge somebody and win a conviction? That's their main job.
Yeah. No, you're right. There's 93 U.S. attorneys over the 94 judicial districts in the United States, including Guam and other places. Hawaii, obviously, the District of Hawaii is much more beautiful than the Southern District of Texas. But there's 93 U.S. attorneys. They're each presidentially appointed, and they serve at the pleasure of the president. And their job is to prosecute crimes that occur in their district. The tradition, and one of the things I talk about in this book that Jim Comey did wrong as FBI director, was to talk about declining to prosecute cases, and he did that in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And U.S. attorneys speak with indictments. They don't kind of do their prosecutions in public. If they're doing a really good job, no one should even know. If they decide to decline to prosecute, no one should know that there's even an investigation that was pending. And so, that being said, I think John Durham has a little different role because he's been asked by Attorney General Barr to conduct a review and an investigation. And I think he's been asked to also produce a report because, again, the Attorney General Barr has the discretion to release necessary information when it's in the public interest. And I think especially as we look back as to what happened and why it happened, I think that's an important story to tell.
Along the lines of what you're saying about information being released and people not knowing, the general public not knowing when there's an investigation happening, during the Trump presidency, there's been really a number of legally unprecedented things happening, including this demand by congressional Democrats to release grand jury information. I mean, that seems to be what you're saying. If they investigate and don't find sufficient evidence to bring an indictment, we're not supposed to spill all this non-evidence around in public, right?
Exactly. And this is one of the things I talk about as to why the special counsel regulation of the Department of Justice is such a bad and probably unconstitutional, grab of power from the president. And what happens is we in investigations, we never talk publicly about the targets of investigations. We never talk about we don't want to update the public as to how our investigation is coming along. And, it is important that grand juries are kept confidential and targets are kept confidential. Because, again, being charged with a crime is almost in today's day and age as bad as being convicted of a crime. But even being publicly exposed as being the target of an investigation, that is almost as bad as being charged or convicted of a crime. So I think, these are, when I talk about restoring and returning to regular order in my book, that's what I talk about, is these ideas that we have to follow these traditions. There's a reason that our system of justice has these things be confidential. And I think it's wholly inappropriate for Congress to receive grand jury information. Now, I had to laugh. I mean, I really had to chuckle when this argument was being made by the House that somehow anything given to them could be kept confidential. I mean, that's, I've seen so many things, as soon as they are handed to the House or the Senate, leak from Capitol Hill. It's as certain as the sun rising in the morning as to Congress leaking anything they receive.
Yeah. And certainly Adam Schiff took total control of the Intelligence Committee, initiating an impeachment process that he really had no authority to do, and there was certainly no precedent for. A lot of people wonder why Devin Nunes wasn't able to be more effective when he was the chairman. You've got, obviously, a very close relationship with Representative Nunes. He's written the foreword for Above the Law. He also spoke about how he was kind of beset on all sides by snakes from within the swamp. Can you speak at all about that? Why was Chairman Nunes not able?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I would say is, how many people have been injured by Adam Schiff trying to run to a camera and being in his way? That's the first thing I would say. I would like to know that number. I'm sure it's a big number. But in all seriousness, the media just gives Adam Schiff a platform, even though he has been proven to not be truthful. And at the same time, you take a conservative like Devin Nunes, who has been accurate and correct in everything he said, everything he has gone in front of a camera and said, and the media dismisses him because Adam Schiff tells the narrative that the media wants to hear and believes, whereas Devin Nunes tells the truth and the media doesn't want to hear his narrative. And so, I think it's a disgusting double standard. It is, those two men and how they've led the Intelligence Committee in the House has been entirely different. Devin Nunes did it with facts and consistent with the law. And, Adam Schiff has just been, again, a grandstander and has been proven to be factually incorrect on many fronts.
Well, and what do we do about people like Adam Schiff and others who say one thing under oath in various investigations and spin a completely different narrative to the media, which is willing, of course, to embrace the different narrative? I mean, is there no way to have some justice over this 3-year debacle we've had, 4-year debacle?
I think we just need to continue to call it out when we see it. I mean, it's so gross that everyone went in front of the House Intelligence Committee and testified that there was no evidence, and they had no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And yet so many people, both that were witnesses in that and so many people, especially Adam Schiff, would go in front of the cameras and say quite the opposite. I mean, I don't know how and why the media chooses to give him a platform. They shouldn't, and it just demonstrates that their journalistic standards are so low that if it's consistent with the narrative that they already believe or want to advance, that they will put anybody on, no matter the veracity of what they're saying.
So back on the ways in which these prosecutions normally happen. Durham is from Connecticut, right? And is his office in New Haven, or does he have multiple offices in Connecticut? It's somewhere in Connecticut.
Yeah. So he's the U.S. Attorney for the entire state of Connecticut. I think they're headquartered in either New Haven or I can't think of the other town.
Hartford, maybe.
Hartford. Yeah, Hartford.
Yeah, so would he? Let's say, and I'm just spinning a hypothetical here. Let's say he did find a crime and he wanted to charge somebody. Is he required to convene a grand jury in Connecticut, or does he have the latitude to do one anywhere in the U.S.?
I would expect, usually you convene, you investigate and charge through the grand jury process wherever, a place that has venue, which is typically where the crime is committed. And so I would fully expect he's working hand in glove with the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. Or somewhere else, wherever these crimes may have been committed, whether it's in Maryland, whether it's in Virginia, and so he's got broad discretion and will work collaboratively not only with the investigators but also with the prosecutors.
Well, that's great. So, Matthew, you've been very generous with your time.
Well, if I could just ask, you've been the highest-ranking officer of the DOJ to ever even speak about the possibility of investigating the Clinton Foundation. And I know that a lot of Crowdsource the Truth viewers were hopeful that you would become not just acting Attorney General, but the full Attorney General. Did you think that there was a moment where you might be?
Yeah, I really believe that Bill Barr was the right pick. He's the right person for the moment. It just wasn't my time, and I accept that as someone of faith and conviction. I understand that, God's plan for my life. I could have never imagined coming to Washington, D.C. and doing what I was able to do. And so I see it as a great honor to have served in this administration. Obviously, to lead the department that I care so much about was also an honor of a lifetime. And so, God's plan for my life will be revealed at the right time. And I'm just excited that having done what I did and be able to tell this story in Above the Law, and we'll see. We'll see what if the president calls. I'll certainly listen to him.
Another perhaps spot to consider, which I believe is in one sense lower than Attorney General, but in another sense it lasts for 10 years, would be to head the FBI and try to shake that place back to where it should be. Is that something you would consider if that came up?
Well, currently we have an FBI director, so there's no vacancy there.
We do? Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Not to stay on questions that I'm fairly certain Charles doesn't want me to ask you, but do you share any of the concerns that many Crowdsource the Truth viewers have about General Barr's previous experience as Attorney General under Ronald Reagan and all the pardons that were presided over with regard to the Iran-Contra scandal? I mean, I'm sure you're aware of the allegations that Bill Clinton participated in Iran-Contra as the governor of Arkansas, with cocaine being flown into Mena Airport. Isn't that a concern?
Wow, we're going far afield here. So
I'd be excoriated by the audience if I didn't ask a question like that.
I love your audience. I'll have to schedule another time to come on and talk about the Reagan and our Iran-Contra controversies and Bill Barr's relationship to it. I know General Barr personally. I have a lot of admiration for him. I think that oftentimes sort of we just got to count on him to do the job. It's an important job, and I think he's the right man for this season.
Well, one thing I can tell you about him is I went to the same high school that he went to, and he's a number of years older than I am, obviously, but he strikes me as one straight arrow who is determined. I almost, in some of the ways he talks, and you've spent a lot of time with him, it strikes me when he said that the persecution of Trump was abhorrent.
Yeah, and he's absolutely right. And I think again, he's going to speak the truth. And I think that right now, the most important thing that he can do in restoring the integrity and honor at the Department of Justice is to follow the rule of law, follow regular order, and do things the right way for the right reason. And so that's really how I tried to lead while I was at the Department of Justice, and I know that that's what General Barr is doing.
That's very reassuring. Because one thing just to share with you, I'm just a citizen, and I care about fraud, exposing fraud, and I have the ability, because of my training, to try to do it. When I embarked on this project, before I met Jason, I won't say who it was exactly, but I met with a senior Fox analyst, and I said to him, "Do you trust Jim Comey?" And the person could not immediately say yes. If somebody asked me a question, do I trust somebody I've known for a while, I'll say yes or no quickly. This person dropped the football. And that meeting occurred in, I want to say, early 2016. For the United States to be at a place where somebody like me or members of the general public don't trust the FBI, don't trust the Department of Justice, that is not a good place. And for the benefit of the whole political spectrum, we need to get back to a better place. We need to read your book, circulate your book, and hope that God's plan for you includes bringing you back to D.C. with a big walking tall bat so that we can get some justice restored across the country.
Yeah, I think we all share the goal of restoring the FBI and the Department of Justice to the place that they deserve. It's the only department that's named after a virtue instead of a function. And I think, really we have to live up to those ideals every day. And every person at the Department of Justice, all 110,000 folks, need to remember what the mission is and to make sure that they always are wearing the white hat of justice.
Well, General Whitaker, you've spent so much of your time with us today. We really appreciate it. We want to remind our viewers to check out your book. They can purchase it from Amazon.com. The book, among other retailers, of course, it's called Above the Law. It's the inside story of how the Justice Department tried to subvert President Trump. It's available now on Kindle in hardcover, and it's coming out as an audio book, I think June 30th. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So people like me with poor reading retention can wait until June to listen to the book.
Well, thank you for your service, sir. And thank you for your time.
All right. Appreciate
Absolutely.
your time. Thank you.
Take care. Have a great day.
You too.
Well, Charles, that was really an excellent interview with the former acting Attorney General,
Wonderful
Matthew
man.
Whitaker. The comments were, believe me, that was the softest softball question I could have asked given the comments. But, I mean, it's a difficult position, obviously, for him to be in. I hope he will join us again and answer some of these questions that are, look, obviously he's in the position where maybe he will be the FBI director in the future or some other important role. He's a young guy. He could serve in the government in a lot of different ways. So sometimes hitting the nail directly on the head, the hammer bounces back and hits you in the face.
No, I think that I mentioned, I think off air, that I had spoken to Matt in, I want to say 2016, when he had a job in a charity and he was raising concerns about the Clinton Foundation. He's a very knowledgeable person. He understands charity law. But I sense what they do to you in Washington, D.C. is they want to get you in a senior position where you're so busy that you actually can't do your work. I mean, it seems to be what they do, right? They head of the SEC.
They're doing a great job of that.
Right. The head of the IRS? No, I can't look at the Clinton Foundation. Head of the SEC? I can't look into GE. I can't do that. I mean, that would be too big of a win, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that this is a genuinely decent human being who was only acting U.S. Attorney General for a number of months, a short period of time. So there's no way that he would have had the mandate to do everything that needed to be done.
Well, and he speaks about how everybody was against him from inside there. Right. So it's hard to even imagine how, like if you were working at a company and you told people to do something and they all just did the opposite of what the company needed to do to succeed.
Well, people I know who've been in government in senior positions, when I talk to them about this, because you're absolutely right. When you're an entrepreneur and you have your own company and you understand that you're responsible for paying the bills and paying the salaries, you need to bill revenue, you need to collect revenue. The answer that I'm thinking about deciding the work program under which I might consider getting a customer is not the approach that you can take in business. But in government, these people in government, most all of them are being paid now through the shutdown. The private sector people are not.
Right.
They can, if a job's going to take a week, they can spend 52 weeks on it. Doesn't matter. No one says to them, why'd you spend 52 weeks on it? That's what we do in government.
I've told you the story about my former 21st Century 3D employee who used to work at the post office, and his first day he got all the mail delivered and came back before lunch and presumed there would be more mail for him to take out, and they were like, what the hell are you doing? You're making us all look bad. So from then on, he went home, played PlayStation until lunch, and then delivered all the mail.
I've heard similar stories, sadly, and we shouldn't laugh about it. I had a close friend living in Washington, D.C., who was telling me, he's in the computer consulting area, and he was explaining that the systems are perhaps on purpose so awful throughout the Department of Agriculture, and not the national security portions of the government, that these people are, they're not really computer literate, the bureaucrats, and so the approach they take is they hire consultants.
Right.
And, they come in at the crack, not all of them obviously, but many of them come in at the crack of 10:30, have their coffee.
Hack the network,
no,
warehouse the data at their home.
These are the employees. I'm talking about the ones, Department of, administrative side of some of these things. And, then they figure out where they're going to have lunch, and they have lunch, they come back at 3, have another cup of tea, leave at 4 o'clock to get out to the country club, and let all the consultants do the work. And meanwhile, you're paying these people. People say government employees aren't that well paid. That's not really true, because you have to look at...
You don't work that much.
Well, the salary is whatever it is, and on top of which you have these massive benefits. You can get pensions much earlier, a pension period, and if you get one, you get it much earlier than in the private sector. So to have government workers not working and then turning around and hiring consulting firms to try to, do the work at, say, 4 times the cost of the government worker, and then doing that on a basis where eventually the government worker can have a family member or some friend go to work inside the consulting firm or get some other kind of kickback. There's nobody looking at this mess, the way you or I and others we know who are good at looking at math and finance problems is doing. So that the amount of unbelievable fraud and corruption is there. And you heard Matt say, one of them was telling things for me was him saying, he's an outsider, but I don't know anybody else who was in the Rose Bowl as a starting, tight end for University of Iowa. That's pretty impressive.
Did you see that picture of him shaking Sessions' hand? It almost looks like he would pick him up and throw him across the room. But that's a tough guy to be the Attorney General. That's an imposing man. I wanted to ask him, because along the lines of what's happened with President Trump talking about Twitter, this was just sent to me right before we went on with General Whitaker. Laura Loomer's lawsuit against Twitter has been thrown out by the D.C. Circuit Court. We're going to have to look into this and maybe contact Larry Klayman to see what's going on, but it's at least been suggested that this was kind of retaliatory. People find it hard to imagine that this could have been written so quickly as to release it seemingly in response to some of the comments the president has made. It's almost as if this thing was waiting for the right moment to be sprung on people, but pretty disappointing that Laura Loomer, even though she's running for Congress and by many metrics is leading in Florida's 21st district, Twitter doesn't want to hear from her.
Yeah, well, this whole area of Twitter, I have to say that I have enjoyed using Twitter, and I appreciate my Twitter following, and it's a very nice picture of Laura.
Yeah.
So it can be an instrument that is useful in spreading opinions around. It can be a good way to meet people that you'd like to meet for business, certainly in the journalistic and investigative field. But I have to say, the notion that some bearded, scruffy, elf hat wearing team is going to sit there wherever they are in San Francisco and try to decide, well, that comment is right and this comment is wrong and that comment is right. How can anybody do that responsibly? And when we think, if we pull up Adam Schiff's...
I was just going for the elf hat. I'm trying to stay up to speed with the... What did we want from Adam Schiff?
His Twitter feed. I mean, the number of just
Falsehoods.
boldly spiteful and false comments out of Adam Schiff, out of John Brennan, out of Gerald Nadler. You just go down the long list. The number of lies uttered by Bill Clinton and Angel Urena and Hillary Clinton and all the above, those just sail out into the Twitter sphere. And Donald Trump gets these stickers attached to his comments. And even I have started on some of mine. I like Zero Hedge a lot. I've been in there a bunch, and
they give you the warning that it's dangerous to look at.
Right. I mean, every single news article that comes out of the New York Times, you should have that warning. Washington Post, the same warning. And let's back up. We don't need in this country, or it hasn't gotten to a place where I need some elf hat wearing, scruffy bearded dude in San Francisco to help me evaluate a comment from somebody else. I don't need that.
I want to help you evaluate this incredibly troubling image of Adam Schiff, because it seems like someone's trying to help him make a better video. You see, what do you observe about his eyes there, Charles?
It's strange.
He's got a rim light, like a circular light around his phone that's trying to evenly light his face, but it's going a little bit too up his nose. And I mean, this looks terrible. He needs to back up and get on a longer lens, because he is not a handsome guy. I'd get an 85 or something. Just get out of the room and get further away from him.
But on this issue that, what Donald Trump says, we immediately go into orbit. Did you hear the latest thing that the president said? He said that John McCain isn't a war hero. That's outrageous.
Right.
Maybe you need to go into the history a little bit more carefully. And the lessons that I take away from my amateur study of history is, sometimes it's the visionaries, or oftentimes it's the visionaries, the true inventors, who are greeted with disdain or scorn or whatever.
Right.
Galileo comes to mind as one example. And when you take on, if Twitter were to live up to the founding principles that they'd like to say they might be associated with, they should be encouraging controversial speech, right? And they should be encouraged. Somebody says something really controversial, anybody on Twitter can say that's wrong for these 15 reasons,
right?
And if you get a case of somebody like Adam Schiff, who's always wrong, you boot his ass off Twitter. But when we look at Donald Trump's controversial statements, his hit ratio is very, very high. I mean, I'm actually quite impressed by the degree to which he will say something that at first blush seems outrageous. And then you go and you look at the facts and you say, I never stopped to look at the facts before. And evidently
Obama's birth certificate actually is fake.
Right. I mean, you just so this idea that the public square has now been reduced to discussions by Twitter or Instagram or Google or Facebook or a few other platforms, and that the young, relatively young and inexperienced, frankly, executive teams that are in these organizations are now going to serve as the
arbiters of truth,
as we are, is just ridiculous. And it suggests that they have way too much power.
Absolutely. Fauci's daughter works for Twitter. So, I mean, I'm not into throwing somebody off of Twitter if they're wrong or whatever. I think the way all these things should work is that unless you do something illegal on there, it should go. I mean, you can't threaten people with violence. You can't incite people to commit violence. You can't, do scams and fraud on there. But if you want to say the most outrageous thing, people should come to their, it's the same reason why the Ku Klux Klan is allowed to have a meeting or a website or whatever. Put that out there and people will know what you're all about, and they'll be given ample warning to avoid that.
Right. But the suggestion that Donald Trump has been pounding and I think raising the temperature on, that these social media platforms will be used to influence, because they already have been used to shape opinion, that they will perhaps even more aggressively be used to hold back damaging information concerning swamp rats and globalists, and in contrast, tamp down the followings of you and me and others who are we're really trying to speak truth to power. They are the power.
Yeah.
And, which is kind of a paradoxical place to be for me, but anyway.
Well, what else would you like to discuss, Charles?
Well, I think we are sitting here in a momentous week. There's a lot of talk I guess there's these two documentaries that have come out on, or are coming out on Epstein, or one?
I was going to bring that up, but I didn't know if it was too off the main subject to talk about. There's the Netflix miniseries, Filthy Rich, which is based on the book from James Patterson, and it's also produced by James Patterson, which is extremely interesting for people who are not familiar immediately with James Patterson. He has co-authored books with Bill Clinton. He's been on Jeffrey Epstein's jet in the movie. Well, it's a miniseries, but in the first episode, he even says that he's like Epstein's neighbor, and that's how he got to know him. It makes me feel like this is maybe more of a biographer than an investigative journalist.
Well, I don't think he's actually Epstein's next door neighbor. I mean,
that's what he said.
No.
He said essentially his neighbor in Palm Beach.
Yeah, he lives in, I happen to know
I'm just telling you what he said.
I know what he said, but I think he's referring to it from the standpoint that they live in the same city or the same town, because I happen to know his actual previous next door neighbor. I know precisely where he lives, and it's not where Epstein lived. It's not the same part of Palm Beach. But anyway, I think it's interesting. You know, you are in the film and entertainment business, and I'm not.
Well, you're in it now.
Well, I mean, in the way that you've been in it, you know. So I don't produce things. I don't try to put these shows together. You do all that so well, and my guess is to put together a Netflix documentary. You don't just slap it together and say,
"Oh no,"
you know, it's going to come. So here they've decided to release this week, you know, and there's another one, I think, as well, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. But
so this is at a moment.
Who made that one, and where is that one?
I think that's a UK one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the point is with Netflix, is it Reed Hastings, I think, is the top guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's an arch anti-Trumper type.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But the idea of releasing this now is quite interesting to me, because it just brings up again the connections among Epstein, Bill and Hillary Clinton, and others. It brings that all back to the fore right now, at a time when Joe Biden, you know, to describe his campaign as moribund or a faceplant doesn't come close. I mean, this is revenge of the dead politician. I mean, the guy is walking wounded. And out comes this documentary. What does this documentary do? I think it hurts the Clintons.
Why?
Well, because it brings Epstein back up again, and Clinton possibly, you know, being more involved with Epstein than he has said previously.
But this article is kind of stating what my feeling was when I was watching it, that this is more of something that is attempting to paper over the true facts of Epstein and give us a version of it that is made by one of the guys that wrote the book with Bill Clinton. I mean, the thing just reeks of a PR piece for Epstein.
Then, of course, they
pictured with Trump, yeah. Right? They keep talking about, you know, the part that I haven't watched the whole thing, but they're talking about Mar-a-Lago, and this article here says that it synthesizes legal information with first-person testimony. You know, after this incredibly objectionable interaction with Alan Dershowitz, I'm beginning to wonder to what extent all these lawyers and lawsuits around this whole Jeffrey Epstein thing might not be presenting information that is initially appears to be one thing, but I just, this concept of lawfare is something that I'm not going to let go of. And I think just like if I played tennis against you, you'd flatten me. I suck at tennis. And I'm sure you're thinking of a million tennis-oriented things when a ball flies that way, that I'm just there like, and you know, expert lawyers, not specifically Alan Dershowitz, but someone like Alan Dershowitz, could conceivably know a vast number of ways that they could do things with public relations and civil lawsuits that might potentially have some impact on a criminal case.
Yeah, I think for me, the first issues for Epstein are exactly how did Epstein get inserted into the Clinton orbit? That to me is interesting. I don't think it happened after Clinton left the White House. I think that Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein probably had some road in to Bill Clinton when he was president. And so tracing that history, really understanding that history by going through the evidence, White House logs such as they exist, books, etc. I haven't done that.
Dersh told us, Linda Rothschilds.
But he didn't say what year. So I don't know that that's the first time.
Prior to 2007, he said that they were introduced.
Again, I don't know that that's what he said. I don't know that that's actually true. I suspect, when I look at this timeline, as Matthew Whitaker said so eloquently, the whole narrative here is to say Trump, Russia, to distract you from looking at Clinton, Bush, Obama, China, right? That's a whole, let's go over here and get all excited about Russia. Ignore the fact that China and frankly India have been draining the United States of America of its secrets, of its job opportunities for 30 years. And a lot of that happened. A lot of the changed policy embracing China and India in the modern period happened at first under Bill Clinton. And so what happened, it's interesting to know, we've talked about the Clinton slush funds ad nauseum, and I didn't want to go chapter and verse into it with Matthew Whitaker because
He's more focused on the book right
He's focused now on the book. But October 23rd, 1997, when this thing was incorporated, within a week or so was a state dinner at the White House for China. And I did mention, for the Chinese leader, and I did mention that Bill Clinton set up on, I think it's December 1st or 2nd, 2008, a Clinton Global Initiative, the first international summit in China. And here we are upset that Donald Trump might have done in the transition something wrong, that Sergei Kislyak may have spoken to Michael Flynn about the sanctions and this and that. Hillary freaking Clinton's husband had, there's the press release right there.
That's
there. Yeah. I mean, this is on the Clinton Foundation website, bragging about holding this the Clinton Global Initiative Asia meeting in Hong Kong on December 2nd, 2008. And it says it's bringing together current and former heads of state and the region's leading figures from business and nonprofit sectors and monkey business sectors, doesn't say that, to address some of the world's most pressing challenges. And I love the way he says that. Today, I'm going to address some of the world's most pressing. It's like Mel Brooks, hold some of my calls. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, figure out what challenges you're going to address and do the most important one first. Nonetheless, if we stop here, all commitments are available online. President Clinton established the Clinton Global Initiative in 2005. As Diamond and Silk would say, no, he didn't. There was no such thing, right? As a project of the nonpartisan. No, it isn't. William J. Clinton Foundation, which didn't exist on this date under that name. I mean, this thing is out there. It's in the public domain. And, clearly the FBI is like, we're not going to look at any of that. I mean, contrast this behavior, this ballsy behavior. You've got the former president and the husband of the incoming Secretary of State strapped it, jumping into Air Grifter 1 to fly to Hong Kong with a whole bunch of grifters to get around and try to obviously curry favor from the Asian people with the incoming Obama administration. That's okay. But Michael Flynn can't take a phone call or a text message from Sergei Kislyak without spending 3 years or 4 years of his life losing his house and suffering all kinds of damages.
Destruction to his reputation. Can we talk for a second, Charles, about this letter that I raised with Fallon Dershowitz? This is a Yahoo News article from July 8th, 2019. It says Epstein's lawyer claimed the alleged pedophile helped devise the Clinton Global Initiative. But you've definitely been talking about this. Oh, this is from National Review.
That's probably commenting, if we get the actual article, it's probably commenting on Malia Zimmerman's piece in Fox News the day of or the day before. And so, my understanding of the way the legal justice system works is something like this. I don't know if he had to go through a jury trial or he accepted a plea agreement, in the Epstein case. Let's assume, let's leave that aside. You're in a moment where you've either confessed to being guilty or you've been found guilty, and now the time comes to seek leniency. And you get all your people around you, famous people, to write letters and say, well, Epstein is a saint for this reason or that reason or whatever. Typically, my understanding was, and you call me foolish, that when you're seeking leniency as a result of having admitted or found guilty to a crime, you probably don't want to brag about the crimes that you committed, as an argument for why you should get leniency. I mean, this Andrew Kerr is another one who wrote about this.
This is, the articles are leading me around to, saying that the letter first surfaced, but where is this actual letter?
If you go back into this, it says first reported, hit that click. Then you'll get to the Malia Zimmerman article, and this came out July 6, 2016. Now remember, just before you go anywhere, July 6, 2016 is a very important time. This is just the day after Comey exonerated Hillary Clinton, either the day after or the day of, right? And now right?
Yeah.
So she writes this thing, and if you go down the page, I think there is a link to the actual. There it is.
Oh, there it is.
You hit the letter. Maybe they de-linked it, but you used to be able to click on that and get the actual letter. It's by Gerald Lefcourt, signed by Gerald Lefcourt, I think. And there you stop there. It says, it was part of the original group that conceived the Clinton Global Initiative. No, he didn't.
Well, that's carefully legally written so that I think they have a lot of wiggle out kind of room.
Yeah, but the point is you can conceive anything you want, but it is a crime to solicit money.
23-page letter written by high-powered lawyers Alan Dershowitz and Gerald Lefcourt.
Yeah.
How does he not know about this? He acted like he never heard of it. It's just been reported. This is a major source of annoyance, I would think, to him.
Well, I think it's because when you go, if you stop for a second, he's sending it to the first assistant U.S. attorney, the chief of the criminal division in the Southern District of Florida. This isn't just a by-the-way letter.
How do you like the zip code? 33132?
I think...
it's 23 pages. How much would it cost to get Dersh to write you a 23-page letter? I mean, thousands.
I mean, if this is a letter going into, the New York Public Library apologizing for keeping a book out for an extra year, that's okay, maybe you'll get a fine. But this is not a small deal. You're seeking leniency in using the mail in communications with government officials. And I don't know where Alan Dershowitz was if he signed this, where he was when he signed this letter. This is from a New York law firm, right? So it's a mail traveling across state lines, and this letter is demonstrably false, right? And you pick it apart and you look at the claims. So the question is, did Dershowitz just say, all right, we'll take Epstein's word? I mean, why would Epstein lie? Or did they actually do any investigation and come to the conclusion that let's just exaggerate a little bit? Let's not, is the Clinton Global Initiative a thing? Was it actually lawfully organized or operated at any time? And if not, why would Jeffrey Epstein take credit, for criminal charity fraud, a massive criminal charity fraud? Indeed, my understanding is that Jeffrey Epstein's early involvement with Clinton and the charity world was on this famous trip in September 2002, where they used Epstein's jet. It wasn't for the Clinton Global Initiative, because there was no Clinton Global Initiative in 2002. This was for the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative, which also didn't exist.
Oh.
Right? So they get together with Kevin Spacey. Now, he had no problems, did he? Kevin Spacey? He wasn't accused of anything, was he?
His father was a Nazi. I think his brother said that they were raped by the father, and there's a lot of people who have accused Kevin Spacey of some weird stuff.
Right. So they're on Epstein and Spacey. There's a team. Epstein and Spacey get on a jet. It's the beginning of a joke. And they go to Africa. And at that time in 2002, there were no legitimately approved generic HIV/AIDS medicines of any kind. The World Health Organization, the same group, run now by Tedros, Dr. Tedros, had March 20th or thereabouts 2002 approved certain generic formulations of HIV/AIDS medicine. But that is not, when the World Health Organization does that, that does not mean that the FDA says, oh, the World Health Organization says that, fine fine by us. That's not the way it works, at least in the United States of America. We then did not hold the World Health Organization approval process in a high regard. So March 2002, the World Health Organization approves these generic HIV/AIDS medicines. It's not till 2005 that the FDA approves certain formulations of certain generic HIV/AIDS manufacturers. But in the meantime, Jeffrey Epstein's plane, perhaps, and certainly Bill Clinton and Iron Magazine and others are engaged in projects to seed the developing world with these unapproved, untested, and some say adulterated HIV/AIDS medicines that may well have killed people. And this is something we knew about by 2007 because I believe there were investigations launched into Ranbaxy around that time. So for Epstein to take credit for this project and for Dershowitz to sign his name to a letter that takes credit both for the Clinton HIV/AIDS thing and for the Clinton Global Initiative is either unbelievably reckless or an attempt to
misdirect.
Misdirect, exactly.
I think that might be it, because I think we've seen some other attempts to misdirect. Charles, do you have that letter that's no longer able to be downloaded, that 23-page letter?
I don't actually have a printed out copy of it, but you think if you just Google 23 left court Dershowitz and Epstein, maybe you'll get some. It used to be linked. I read it. I thought it was linked here. I may have it. I contacted Malia, and I think she may have sent it to me. I'll have to look.
Yeah. It doesn't appear to be.
Now, remember, in this time frame, this is July 6, 2007. Once again, we're back in July 6. In July 6, 2007, Hillary Clinton is the presumptive frontrunner and likely next president of the United States, right? She hadn't had to go through a campaign or any primaries or any debates, or many debates at least, by July 6, 2007. She had announced her candidacy on January 20th, 2007, and of course the mainstream press was all in for Hillary in the beginning. So was this an effort just to sweep the Epstein mess off the public attention, so as to not have it crop up at an inopportune time as the primaries proceeded? But I just don't understand. I mean, I had, until I saw your interview, I had a very high regard for Dershowitz and for some of his commentary. And it struck me that he's, was, as a younger person, academically gifted and certainly well-trained and highly experienced. 13 years ago, to allow a letter like this to go out under his signature strikes me as being, worse than reckless.
Well, what about how much of a jerk he was when he spoke to me?
Yeah, that's not so good either. and that brings up, a whole nother area. We talk in the banking profession or in the financial profession. Anytime there is a crash or a reversal in the stock market, the pinheads in Washington, D.C. and academia are all in for letting senators and representatives and other regulators regulate markets, open and close markets, discipline executives. And the financial business is a greed business. And so when you're selling, encouraging the greediest among us to get involved in the sleaziest of projects, you better have a regulator to slap those people down, because there are amoral people in any profession. So I'm not saying I'm against financial regulation. There should be financial regulation, and indeed there's not enough. I mean, out of the crash in 7 through 9, not many senior executives went to prison.
Right.
And if they paid fines, these were trafficking ticket fines. They kept the bulk of their wealth, and they pay. We're in a place now, speaking of Dershowitz and other lawyers, where the legal profession cannot regulate itself. We asked Matthew Whitaker, how did Rosenstein decide whether he had a conflict of interest? And basically the answer was, I asked myself, do I have a conflict of interest?
No. I can tell you didn't want me to ask him too many more questions about Devin Nunes because I think they're friends. But I mean, see, I don't want to ask these questions to be some annoying pain in the ass. I want to get a good understanding. I mean, Matthew Whitaker spent some time in the small amount of the book that I had the opportunity to read, because we just got it. Spent some time talking about how he was an outsider. He initially was a U.S. attorney in Iowa,
right,
and then he was fired when Obama came in, or relieved of duty, as he rightfully says, as the incoming president's, that's his prerogative to do. So he was relieved of that. So he's got government experience, but then when he went to Washington to apply to work for Sessions, he describes that he's an outsider.
Right.
So my questions would immediately be, was Devin Nunes one of the few people to kind of cozy up to you and be your friend? And then I start to look at some of my own experience, because I started doing this show right around the same time that he went to Washington, and I think about the people that cozied up to me to try to be my friends, and how some of them are coincidentally represented by the same lawyer as Devin Nunes. I wonder if Devin Nunes isn't positioning himself to have influence over Matthew Whitaker in a way that Matthew Whitaker might not be aware of.
Well, I have a close friend from college who's a lobbyist and has been a lobbyist in mostly Washington, D.C. for a long time. And this person, when I got involved in the Clinton Foundation stuff, I happened to speak to her a little bit about trying to navigate Washington. And, she dutifully informed me that, Washington, people don't understand the way Washington works. The show that you see involving senators and congressmen and presidents and cabinet officials, that's for show. The real work goes on with the
bars.
Well, the real work goes on by staffers. Huh. Staffers shape the legislation. I mean, you see these 2,000-page bills that get, nobody can read a 2,000-page bill and understand it in time for a vote. It's just no,
right.
2,000-page bill is like 8 books, 10 books.
All bad.
All bad, written in gibberish. Because they don't write the bills, typically so you can understand.
It's not a narrative. It's a complicated legal, and a lot of these guys aren't even lawyers. You're going to look at it, your head will spin.
Well, they write it's one like a change document. It'll say, first page it'll say, in paragraph, 33J, whatever it is, B, delete the word in and add the word out. Now you got to find that. I mean, they don't give you an explanation of what the thing really is. So her point of view, and this is, I think, a real problem around the world, is that the system is set up in a way to hide what's really going on.
Right.
And that's what I think people across the political spectrum, you and me and others, are so frustrated with. It's not like, we would abide a system like this if it was working, maybe, but it isn't working. I mean, the global economy has been shut down because some idiots looked at a model that was completely wrong and said, we gotta flatten the curve. We got that done. And then now we can't go back out again until we find a vaccine. I mean, it's just that there's no re-examination of this craziness that we're all going through together. Who got to Donald Trump and convinced him to switch? I mean, his original instincts, I would argue, were correct. So who was the person who did this sell job or con job or whatever to say to the president, look, this is different than other types of viruses? We just saw today, moments ago, CDC is coming out over the last 24 hours saying the mortality rate is quite low.
Well, who is the person? I think I have the answer, Charles.
Yeah, and so we went from being a country where people enjoyed freedoms protected by the Bill of Rights, Constitution, and could make our own decisions based on the information that we sought out and bear the consequences, to a country now where we can't do anything until an expert tells us, and the governors certainly are not experts.
No.
Until, the scarf, what do they call it? The scarf, and what do they call it? Scarf woman, and what do they call Fausti?
I think it would upset viewers if I said
That's right.
Fauci. It's Italian for midget dope. Sorry. That's not true, actually. I don't speak Italian. But Charles, I know you probably don't care about this, but there is a bit of historic something or other happening right now.
Oh, yeah, the liftoff.
Yeah, Elon Musk's SpaceX, for the first time, is going to be launching one of their rocket modules with astronauts in it.
Is there any truth to the rumor that Gerald Nadler has been added to the flight as ballast?
Yeah, they would have to take him out because it would exceed the liftoff weight. But NASA astronauts Douglas Hurley and Robert Behnken, they're going to launch to the ISS. And this is the first commercial space launch of astronauts in a non-government rocket.
Now, when I was a very little kid, one of the things that we used to be able to do is be sent home from school to watch the different rocket launchings. And I remember, watching something like this in black and white forever, just sitting there glued to the screen, and then you wait for the thing to go, the thing goes up and disappears.
And you're like, that was super anticlimactic.
I know, yeah, like what did I just spend 6 hours watching the television screen for?
Yeah. Well, we got to share some of our interesting and well-known to our viewers graphics with General Whitaker there. I should have had the Rod Rosenstein with the fork in him ready, but I don't know if he knows our sense of humor yet. I have to ease him into that. Hopefully he can come back to the show.
Speaking of your better-known graphics, how is the book project coming along?
Yeah, so I got back to this. I found now another as well. There's a book printing on demand company that I found that's geared towards making high quality photo books. And again, balancing how much it will cost is a big part of the issue. So I'm moving through, culling all the graphic images, going back to, because, when we first started, we were not in full HD 1080p, so some of them are lower resolution. I'm going back to the source imagery. It's almost like remastering the images. Right. This is like when the Beatles re-released all their albums on CD. Yeah. But I'm working on it, and I do want to put it together. I mean, unfortunately, I think the book, it's just going to be expensive to make. So right now, I'm contemplating offering it as a thank you gift to high value sponsors, because I'm not sure that selling it directly makes a lot of economic sense. But we're going to continue looking at that. It's interesting, Charles, people can still enjoy the artwork when they become sponsors on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. $10 per month and higher. They're going to get not only access to Discord for the sponsor exclusive shows, but they're going to get a free gift, the Sunday with Charles screensaver. I think it might be time to make volume 2 of the screensaver as well, so that $10 sponsors can get both volumes of the screensaver. But we're going to have, will we be doing, it's supposed to rain, I think, on Sunday.
I want to try to do slides on Sunday.
So we'll be back to our standard, oh no, it looks like it's sunny on Sunday, raining Friday and Saturday, but maybe.
We'll see what it's like, what the weather's like.
And I would be interested to delve into this contact tracing and Alan Dershowitz's claims that it is totally constitutional to inject you with a never before tested, unknown type of DNA altering vaccine. According to him, that's a fantastic idea. Right. If Cuomo and Whitmer and all those people say you have to do it, too effing bad.
Yeah. I think we should figuratively perhaps dance on Joe Biden's coffin here a little bit. I mean, I think when you contrast the speed and artfulness with which the Trump campaign team deals with issues that arise in an instant, with this look, I mean, why did he select a black mask?
I don't know. I was going to say, this makes me think he's like some kind of character in like a... what's that video game where everybody becomes Resident Evil? For some reason, this reminds me of Resident Evil. Like he's a mission to take out the. Right. I don't know.
And it's and Trump is just so quick on his feet, right? I mean, you saw the Cheryl Atkinson interview, which was very good. It was tough to hear her, but his responses were so good. I mean, the interchange where. Atkinson asked him, can you think of a good thing to say about Joe Biden? And Trump was like, he looks off to the right, he looks off to the left, and he says, more or less says no. and then he says, well, they say people say he has a lot of experience, but how can you have experience if you can't remember what happened yesterday?
You might have the experience, but you can't benefit from it.
Right. I mean,
You don't remember.
And we're in May. There's going to be, we haven't even, the big guns, figuratively, have not even come out yet on, what did the Biden family get out of China, what really happened in Ukraine. Ilhan Omar, who I don't agree with her, I think she's an atrocious human being, but here she agrees with Tara Reid and believes that one of the accusers against Biden is believable and deserves to be heard. And this is in May, before you start getting into re-examining Biden's long career. I mean, when you spend as much time in Washington, D.C. as a senator, representing a minuscule state that happens to have a lot of big banks and other entities that need the influence of the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, chances are palms get greased one way or another, right? This is the person the Democrats want to put out there for 2020?
I'm just looking at this as a nice family photo in the lower left.
Be careful with that. Be careful with that.
Ilhan Omar, really bad. So, Charles, is there anything else we wanted to cover today?
No, I think this is a real honor. We'll get back to Matt to thank him and thank the publicist for reaching out to us. I think you're going to see more of this. When we started on this, I mentioned to you that in my radio show for the Washington Times, I like to do book reviews because I love, when the demand for something exceeds the supply. I like to be in the supply business. And there are many, many books being put out. It used to be that you'd have book reviews in newspapers, and now you don't in magazines as many. So these authors, or more and more of them, are desperate to have audiences. It's tougher to travel. And I felt that our show and your format would be an excellent way to interact with these people, give them more. In a standard book interview on Fox is maybe 8 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. You give an author 45 minutes if they're willing to do it, or an hour. It's quite helpful. And
I think so.
We'll tweet this out, and maybe he'll send it to the publicist, and maybe they will use it to promote the book.
Yeah. Now, someone just told me he's maybe changing his tune. I don't know. Someone in the comments is telling us that Alan Dershowitz has changed his position on the. So Laura Powers tells us Dershowitz has changed his thinking about mandatory jab. I'm looking for that. I don't see that on Twitter. But if he has, it's going to probably be because I was hammering him about how wrong he was. 4:33 is the NASA launch time for Elon Musk's rocket. Why are they doing that, Charles? Why do they need those 3 minutes?
They're playing with you, Jason. They're playing with you.
That's really unbelievable. Well, we're going to look into this issue with Alan Dershowitz. I did make a fool. Thank you, Porgy. I made a fool out of Alan Dershowitz because I'm not bringing in some other law. I just did exactly what he told me to do. Look it up, he said. Right. So I looked it up, and I was like, yeah, what you're saying makes no sense, Dersh. And click. So we'll see. We're going to try to talk to some other lawyers about it. I have a few people I've been speaking to who will come on and share that with us. But my concern, Charles, is that irrespective of what the law says, just in the same way that they've kept us all locked inside, I don't think they have any, for the same reason that they can't mandatory vaccinate you, I don't think that they can force you to wear a face mask to walk into the supermarket. An individual business could. I mean, it's conceivable that somebody could open a business that said, if you don't walk in here wearing a Richard Nixon mask, you're not allowed in. They might not have too many customers, but that's their prerogative. But for the governor to tell you that you can't go into spaces.
In the absence of passing a law, right?
Well, right. But the law, according to what Dershowitz was saying with the police powers, it has to be for the public good. There's some language in there that says they have to be able to demonstrate that it is for the public good and not arbitrary or oppressive. And if they don't know what the vaccine will do, which is just, it's a given. If you've just invented it, you don't know what that's going to do. You can't tell me that's going to help the public good. What if it kills 80% of the people you put it in?
Right.
We could have a separate debate about whether that's for the public good. But you can't just arbitrarily inject people.
Everybody.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a good tension you've exposed there. Trump has said, he changes his mind, but he has said that the vaccine if it comes together, would not be mandatory.
But the military will give it to you if you want it.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so we'll have to explore some more of that on Sunday, Charles. And I guess that's going to be it for today. I really love this new format for closing in. We're getting so many interesting interview guests, and that was great to speak to former acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker. We've had a lot of people watching the show, Charles. We had over 1,200 at a moment there. And I hope that people are enjoying the show. They're going to become sponsors by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You're going to enjoy a huge library of sponsor-exclusive content. And the sponsorship helps keep the free shows going. So a lot of people are concerned about what might happen to the future of this type of information on YouTube. Their CEO has said, if you don't agree with Tedros, we're kicking you out. So we'll see what happens with President Trump turning up the heat on social media. Charles, I'll see you on Sunday. I'll see everybody else tomorrow. Have a great night.